More than 8 months after Hurricane Melissa devastated Jamaica, serious questions are being raised about the handling of funds donated to help affected families rebuild. An Auditor General's report found that the ODPEM had spent only 1.8% of $1.44 billion in cash donations by February 23rd, while millions of dollars in roofing supplies lack complete delivery records. But does this amount to missing money, administrative failure, or a disaster relief system unable to move quickly when Jamaicans need it most? Tonight, we examine the financial trail, the government's explanation, and the critical questions that remain unanswered. Audit exposes slow spending, weak documentation, and serious oversight gaps. More than 8 months after Hurricane Melissa devastated Western Jamaica, questions continue to surround the management of donations and public resources intended to help affected families rebuild. The central issue is not an official finding that the relief money was stolen. Instead, a real-time audit uncovered slow utilization of donations, incomplete financial records, unverified deliveries, and long-standing weaknesses in the management of Jamaica's National Disaster Fund. The findings raise an urgent question. Did Jamaica's disaster management system move quickly and transparently enough to convert billions of dollars in assistance into meaningful relief for people who had lost their homes and livelihoods? Hurricane Melissa made landfall in Jamaica on October 28, 2025, as a Category 5 hurricane. Western parishes suffered catastrophic damage, including the destruction of homes, public infrastructure, farms, and businesses. The scale of the losses was enormous. Jamaica's economic damage was estimated at approximately 10 billion US dollars, while the country initially faced a recovery financing gap estimated at 9.5 billion US dollars. International agencies later announced up to 6.7 billion US dollars in potential support for Jamaica's 3-year reconstruction program. However, that package included sovereign loans, contingent financing, private sector investments, and grants, not simply cash donations available for immediate distribution. This distinction is important. The government's broader recovery expenditure, international financing arrangements, insurance proceeds, household support programs, and cash donations are separate pools of money. They should not be treated as one fund. At the center of the audit was approximately 1.44 billion Jamaican dollars in cash donations received for Hurricane Melissa relief through the Support Jamaica initiative and direct contributions. The most politically damaging finding was the rate at which the donated money had been used. According to the Auditor General's May 2026 report, ODPEM had received 1.44 billion Jamaican dollars in Hurricane Melissa cash donations by February 23rd, 2026. Of that amount, only $26.2 million, or 1.8%, had been spent by that date. The verified expenditure related to roofing materials. ODPEM told auditors in April that the low utilization resulted from an absence of authorization from the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service to spend the donated money. That explanation raises a wider governance issue. If the country's principal disaster agency could receive donations but was unable to deploy them promptly without additional approval, was the financial system properly designed for an emergency? Disaster relief requires controls, but those controls must also allow rapid action. A system that safeguards money while leaving desperate families waiting for months cannot be considered fully effective. The audit found that ODPEM was also holding 138 million Jamaican dollars and 101,974 US dollars in unspent donations connected to Hurricane Beryl, which affected Jamaica in 2024. Auditors said ODPEM did not provide sufficient information showing the total amount collected and spent in response to Beryl. Without that information, they could not determine whether the remaining balances were connected to active projects or reflected weaknesses in planning and implementation. This is significant because the unspent Beryl money existed before fundraising began for Hurricane Melissa. According to the Auditor General, the presence of large unused balances across separate disaster cycles suggested weaknesses in the planning, monitoring, and utilization of donations. The concern, therefore, extends beyond one hurricane. It points to a possible structural problem in Jamaica's disaster financing system. Another serious finding concerned money donated through the Government Support Jamaica platform. A private financial services institution proposed retaining 30% of net donations for 45 days to cover potential bank chargebacks or refund claims. Auditors found that ODPEM had no formal, binding agreement governing that arrangement. Amounts totaling approximately 15.7 million Jamaican dollars and 298,429 US dollars collected between October 28 and December 31st, 2025 should have been transferred by February 15th, 2026. The financial institution confirmed on March 9th that the retained money had not yet been transferred. ODPEM subsequently presented a March 9 transfer receipt covering approximately 16.1 million Jamaican dollars and 305,292 US dollars. However, auditors could not independently confirm that the money reached ODPEM's accounts because the receipt did not display the receipt account numbers and the corresponding bank statements were not supplied for examination. This was not a finding that the institution or ODPEM stole the money. It was a finding that the documentation available to auditors was inadequate to establish a complete and independently verified financial trail. For a publicly promoted disaster donation platform, the absence of a written agreement, clear transfer, timetable, and complete reconciliation process represents a major control weakness. The audit also examined the procurement and delivery of materials under the government-directed roof restoration program. ODPEM awarded 4 roofing material contracts worth approximately 167.3 million Jamaican dollars. Emergency procurement methods, including restricted bidding and single-source procurement, were used. Auditors acknowledged that these methods were permitted under Jamaica's procurement legislation because of the urgency created by the hurricane. However, 3 of the 4 contracts went to 2 suppliers that did not hold valid Public Procurement Commission registration or current tax compliance documentation at the time of the awards. ODPEM relied on emergency guidance issued by the Ministry of Finance, which allowed the engagement of certain unregistered or tax non-compliant suppliers in exceptional circumstances. The use of those suppliers was therefore not automatically unlawful. Nevertheless, emergency exemptions increase the need for strong documentation, delivery confirmation, and post-award monitoring. Of 122.5 million Jamaican dollars in building supplies delivered to Jamaica Defence Force locations, only 88.6 million Jamaican dollars was formally acknowledged by the JDF. Deliveries valued at approximately $34 million at 27.8% of the total were not supported by signed delivery slips or goods received notes countersigned by ODPEM or a JDF representative. The audit did not conclude that $34 million in material was missing or stolen. It concluded that the documentation was insufficient to verify and acknowledge those deliveries. Prime Minister Andrew Holness later described the problem as an, I quote, administrative accounting failure, end of quote. He said some materials were delivered at night when JDF personnel were working, but ODPEM representatives were not present to complete the necessary documentation. That explanation may account for how the paperwork gaps occurred, but it does not eliminate the control risk. Emergency conditions can explain incomplete records. They cannot make reliable records unnecessary. The documentation problems did not end with delivery receipts. As of March 31st, ODPEM had committed $167.3 million for roofing materials, but auditors had verified only $26.2 million in payments. That left $141.1 million in committed expenditure without confirmed payment documentation available to the audit at that stage. Payment information remained outstanding for two contracts valued at $52.3 million and $56.2 million, respectively. Again, unconfirmed does not mean that the payments were improper. It means the audit did not receive sufficient evidence to verify the transactions by its reporting date. In public financial management, however, missing or delayed documentation reduces assurance that money was used exactly as authorized. ODPEM reported that 421 roofs had been repaired by April 2026, with assistance from the Jamaica Defense Force and a foreign military support team. The agency submitted a list of 200 beneficiaries connected to the foreign military team, but geographical coordinates were supplied for only 149 of them. The JDF's tracking platform indicated that the military had completed another 221 roof repairs. Auditors attempted to verify a sample of the repairs, but said they could not complete that exercise because important records were absent. They were not given adequate documentation showing how damage assessments were converted into beneficiary selections, how OSOs were independently verified and approved, what criteria determined who received assistance first, the condition of properties before repairs, formal completion reports showing that the purchased materials were used at the listed homes. These gaps are especially sensitive because beneficiary selection can become politically controversial. Without transparent eligibility rules and a complete audit trail, authorities may find it difficult to disprove claims of favoritism, duplication, or unequal treatment, even when no favoritism occurred. Financial concerns unfolded against a background of continuing hardship. Initial assessments indicated that more than 150,000 homes were damaged or destroyed. By February 10th, the government reported that the Roofs Shelter Program had begun issuing assistance across three damage categories. 75,000 Jamaican dollars for minor damage, 200,000 for major damage, and up to 500,000 for severe damage. By late March, the government said 8.25 billion Jamaican dollars had been disbursed through the wider shelter program, with another 3 billion allocated for approximately 14,000 additional beneficiaries. However, residents and political representatives continue to report that some households had not been assessed, while others were still waiting for payments or roofing assistance. The $8.25 billion reportedly disbursed under the broader roofs program should not be confused with the $1.44 billion in cash donations examined by the Auditor General. The programs may use different funding sources and accounting channels. That distinction forms part of the transparency challenge. Ordinary donors and residents need a consolidated public account showing how much was received from each source, what was committed, what was actually paid, what remained available, and which communities benefited. Perhaps the most consequential findings concerned the National Disaster Fund itself. As of February 23rd, the fund reportedly had approximately 163 million Jamaican dollars in a bank account, with another 293 million in investments as of February 28th. Auditors identified three material areas of non-compliance with the Disaster Risk Management Act. Required statements of account and annual reports for the National Disaster Fund had not been prepared for the 2023-24 and 2024-25 financial years. ODPEM's annual reports for the financial years 2018 to 2019 through 2024-2025 had not been prepared. The National Disaster Fund did not have a dedicated bank account. Instead, transactions connected to the fund were commingled in ODPEM's capital account with transactions relating to a Japan International Corporation agency-funded communications project. The audit attributed the absence of the required reports partly to the lack of functioning fund committee and an appointed chairperson. These were not minor administrative omissions. Separate accounts, annual reports, and an active oversight committee are essential safeguards. They allow Parliament, auditors, donors, and the public to identify precisely how disaster money is being held and used. Prime Minister Holness rejected the suggestion that the low expenditure rate demonstrated government inefficiency. He said the government had deliberately reserved donated funds for tangible and traceable items such as building materials and roof repairs, while other public resources were used for immediate relief and infrastructure restoration. According to the Prime Minister, Jamaica was projected to spend approximately $67 billion on hurricane relief and recovery, including electricity, restoration, roads, schools, hospitals, clinics, and debris removal. He said nearly $10 billion had been deployed through the Wider Roofs program, supporting close to 50,000 Jamaicans. The administration's position is that the 1.8% figure presents only part of the recovery picture because it relates specifically to donated money held by ODPEM at a particular point in time, not total government spending on Hurricane Melissa. That is a relevant defense, but it does not resolve the deficiencies identified by the Auditor General. The lack of an expenditure plan for donations, delayed transfers, incomplete reconciliations, unverified deliveries, weak beneficiary documentation, and non-compliance affecting the National Disaster Fund. For accuracy, the findings must be stated carefully. The audit found extremely low utilization of cash donations as of February 23, 2026, unspent Hurricane Beryl balances and incomplete information concerning their use, donated funds retained without a formal agreement, insufficient banking evidence to verify a later transfer, $34 million in roofing material deliveries without proper acknowledgement records, 141.1 million in contract commitments without corresponding confirmed payment documentation at the audit stage, inadequate beneficiary selection and completion records, long-standing non-compliance and governance weaknesses affecting the National Disaster Fund. The audit did not conclude that 1.44 billion disappeared. It did not establish that $34 million in roofing material was stolen. It did not make a finding of corruption against any named public official. What it established was a system in which weak documentation and oversight reduced the level of assurance that auditors, donors, and citizens could obtain. Several matters deserve continued public and parliamentary scrutiny. How much of the $1.44 billion in donations has now been spent? Has every retained donation been transferred and independently reconciled? Can ODPEM now provide signed evidence of the $34 million in previously unverified deliveries? Have complete payment records been supplied for all 4 roofing contracts? Has every repaired roof been matched to an approved beneficiary damage assessment and completion report? Have the Hurricane Beryl balances been assigned to specific projects? Has a dedicated National Disaster Fund bank account been established? Have the missing statements of account and ODPEM annual reports been completed and audited? Is the National Disaster Fund Committee now functioning with an appointed chairperson? Will the government publish a public dashboard showing receipts, expenditure, contractors, locations, and beneficiaries? The controversy surrounding Jamaica's Hurricane Melissa funds is not presently a proven story of stolen relief money. It is a documented story of delayed deployment, incomplete records, weak institutional controls, and insufficient public visibility. The government can reasonably argue that total recovery spending was far greater than 1.8% drawn from donated funds. It can also argue that emergency conditions contributed to documentation failures, but public confidence cannot rest on explanations alone. Every dollar must be traceable from the donor to the government's account, from the account to the supplier, from the supplier to the warehouse, and from the warehouse to the family whose home was damaged. For Jamaicans still rebuilding, and for members of the diaspora who contributed money and supplies, the ultimate test is not simply whether the funds remain safely in an account. It is whether they reach the people for whom they were intended, within a reasonable time, and through a system capable of proving exactly how they were used. Thank you for watching. Subscribe today, turn on notifications, and never miss the stories that matter most. Jamaica News Now, your Highlands, your news, right now.